At 5:47 in the morning, Zaria Freeman's entire life got handed to someone else's disaster. Her sister ran. The wedding couldn't. And a man whose name made senators flinch was standing at an altar in 4 hours, expecting a bride he had never actually met. Zaria was the backup plan, the forgotten daughter, the one who fixed things nobody asked her to fix and disappeared into rooms nobody thought to check. Now her father was looking at her, really looking at her, for the first time in years. And what he saw wasn't a daughter. He saw a solution. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's get into it. The note was 6 lines long. Denise Freeman read it 3 times before her legs stopped working. She sat down on the edge of Simone's bed, the same bed still warm from the body that had recently vacated it, and her hands started shaking in small, involuntary tremors that she could not control no matter how many times she pressed her palms flat against her thighs. The room smelled like Simone's perfume, something expensive and floral and suffocating. The closet door was hanging open, and the wedding dress, $47,000 of hand-stitched Belgian lace, was still on its padded hanger, exactly where the stylist had left it the night before. Simone was not inside it. Simone was gone. The note said she was sorry. It said she loved them. It said she had a bag packed and a passport and a person she wasn't naming who had promised her a different kind of life. The handwriting was clean and deliberate, each letter formed with the careful precision of someone who had practiced this goodbye many times in private before committing it to paper. At the bottom, in slightly smaller print, Simone had added, "Don't let him find me." Denise read that part 4 times. Then she walked down the hallway and knocked on the door to her husband's study. Gregory Freeman opened it in his bathrobe. He was 61 years old, silver-haired and wide-shouldered, a man whose entire physical presence communicated that he had built things and broken things in equal measure throughout his life. He read the note standing in the doorway with his reading glasses perched at the end of his nose, and his expression didn't change at all. That was the part that frightened Denise the most. Not anger, not panic, just Gregory's face going very still and very cold in the way it did whenever he shifted from being a father into being something else entirely. "How long ago?" he asked. "I don't know. Her bed was cold when I checked." "Hours, then." He folded the note carefully and set it on his desk. "Who else knows?" "Nobody. I came straight to you." Gregory walked to the window. Outside, downtown Chicago was still gray and barely awake. The skyline pressed flat beneath a low ceiling of dark clouds that had been threatening rain since midnight. The street below was empty except for 2 of his security details standing at the building's entrance, their breath visible in the cold morning air. "What time is the ceremony?" Gregory asked. 11. Denise's voice was very quiet. "Gregory, the caterer arrives at 8, the flowers at 9. He wasn't talking to her anymore. He was running a logistics problem, which was the only kind of problem Gregory Freeman had ever truly known how to solve. Minjay's people land at O'Hare at 7:15. His head of security sends a confirmation to me when the motorcade leaves the airport. Gregory, listen to me. Nobody at the ceremony has met Simone in person." He said it like a fact he was testing. The arrangement was conducted entirely through intermediaries. The Kang family has photographs, but the photographs are 2 years old. The room went very quiet. Denise understood what her husband was doing before he finished the thought, and the understanding arrived like something cold pressed against the back of her neck. "No," she said. "The height is close. Gregory, no." "Denise." His voice didn't rise. It never rose. That was always the problem. "I need you to think about what we lose if this wedding doesn't happen today. Not just the money, the territory, the distribution agreements. Everything we've been building for the last 4 years gets dismantled before noon. She's our daughter. Simone made her choice. I'm talking about Zaria." Gregory was quiet for a moment. He picked up his phone, looked at something on the screen, and set it back down. "Go wake her up." Denise stared at him. "You can't be serious. She's 25 years old. She doesn't know anything about Minji. She doesn't know anything about the arrangement. Then I'll explain it to her." "Gregory?" "Denise." He finally looked at her. "Go wake her up." Zaria Freeman's bedroom was at the far end of the apartment, separated from the rest of the family's living space by a long hallway, and what she had always privately understood to be mutual, unspoken preference for distance. The room itself was evidence of a life lived mostly inside her own head. Canvases stacked against the walls in overlapping rows. Jars of acrylic paint arranged by color on a wooden shelf she had built herself from a kit. She ordered online 3 years ago, sketches pinned to a corkboard above the desk, reference photographs and torn magazine pages, and color studies for projects she was always working on and rarely finishing. She was awake when her mother knocked. She'd been awake for an hour, lying on her back staring at the ceiling with her headphones around her neck and a half-read novel face down on her chest. This was normal for her. Sleep had never come easily, and she had stopped fighting it years ago. She simply existed through the dark hours until the light shifted. "Come in," she called. Her mother looked wrong when she opened the door. That was the first thing Zarya noticed. The specific wrongness of her mother's face. The way the composure she maintained at all times had developed a hairline fracture around the eyes. "Mom, what happened?" It wasn't a question. Zarya was already sitting up. Denise sat down at the foot of the bed and held Simone's note out without saying anything. Zarya took it, read it twice, and set it in her lap. "When?" "Sometime last night. I don't know exactly." Zarya looked at the note again. Her expression was hard to read, but that was nothing unusual. Zarya's face had always been a closed room that very few people had ever been given a key to. She and Simone were not close. They shared parents and an apartment and a family name and very little else. Their entire lives, Simone had been the one who was seen, and Zarya had been the one who watched. And this dynamic had never produced much warmth between them. "Dad knows?" "Yes." "What does he want to do?" Denise was quiet for exactly 3 seconds too long, and Zarya understood. She understood before her mother said a word, before her father appeared in the doorway in his bathrobe and his reading glasses, before anyone in the room spoke at all. The understanding arrived whole and complete and devastating, the way truly bad news sometimes did, like the floor dropping away beneath you and your body knowing it before your brain confirmed it. "No," Zarya said. "Zarya, Dad, no." Gregory stepped into the room. He looked at the canvases against the walls, at the paint jars on the shelf, at his younger daughter sitting on her bed in an oversized sleep shirt with a note about her sister's disappearance in her lap. His expression suggested that he was experiencing the room the way a person experienced a foreign country, aware that it had internal logic but unable to quite access it. "I need you to hear me out," he said. "I heard you out the second Mom walked through that door. The answer is no." "You don't know what I'm asking yet. You're asking me to walk down an aisle and marry a stranger and pretend to be Simone." Zarya's voice was completely flat. "That's what you're asking. There's no version of this conversation where that's a different ask." Gregory sat down on the corner of her desk chair and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. He was doing the thing he did when he needed someone to cooperate. His voice dropped, his posture softened, his entire presentation shifted from executive to father in a way that Zarya had learned before she was 10 years old was entirely performative and directed toward outcomes he had already decided on. "The Kang family and this family have been in negotiation for 4 years, he said. "This marriage is the keystone of an agreement that keeps our entire financial network solvent. Without it, by the end of this year, we lose the distribution agreements, the territory protections, and the legal cover that's been keeping 2 federal investigations from becoming indictments. You understand what I'm saying? I understand you're describing consequences you created for yourself." "Zarya, Dad." Her voice didn't waver. "You built a deal on the premise that you could sell your daughter to a crime boss. Simone refused. That's a problem you made." Gregory stared at her for a long moment. Then something shifted behind his eyes. Not remorse, not exactly, but a recalibration. "If the deal collapses," he said quietly, "your mother faces criminal exposure, not just financial ruin. Criminal exposure. The kind that includes a federal attorney and a sentencing hearing." The room went very silent. Zarya looked at her mother. Denise was staring at the floor with the expression of a woman who had known this card was going to be played and had spent the last 20 minutes deciding whether she was going to allow it. "Is that true?" Zarya asked. Her mother didn't answer, which was its own answer. Zarya sat with that for a long moment. The city outside her window was beginning to lighten at its edges, gray turning pale and pale, turning something close to silver. She could hear the distant sound of a truck on the street below, the low moan of the wind around the building's upper floors. She looked down at the note in her lap. "Don't let him find me." "What do you actually know about him?" she asked, her voice very quiet now. He's 34. He inherited the network from his father 6 years ago and tripled its reach. He runs legitimate business operations as a front. He's not an idiot. Gregory's delivery was careful, the kind of careful that meant he was choosing what to leave out as much as what to include. He operates with a strict internal code. He doesn't touch civilians. He's a mafia boss. He's a man who keeps agreements. Dad, Zarya. Gregory leaned forward another inch. I'm not asking you to love him. I'm asking you to stand in a room with him for 45 minutes and say 8 words. Zarya stared at him for a long time. Then she picked up the note from her lap, looked at her sister's handwriting one more time, the careful letters, the apology, the name she didn't write, and set it on the bed beside her. 4 hours, she said. Gregory blinked. What? The ceremony is at 11. It's not even 6. I need 4 hours to think. She stood up. Leave my room. What? She didn't spend 4 hours thinking. She spent 4 hours angry, which was different. The anger was a quiet kind. The kind that didn't produce noise or dramatic action, but simply settled into the body like weather, pressing into the chest and the space behind the eyes, and the tight, controlled set of the jaw. She took a long shower. She made coffee. She sat at her desk and stared at an unfinished canvas on the wall, a study in grays and dark blues, half-formed shapes that she had been working on for 3 weeks without identifying what it wanted to become. At 9:30, she walked back down the hallway and found her father on the phone in the kitchen. I'll do it, she said. Gregory lowered the phone. His expression shifted through something, relief, calculation, a flicker of something that might have been guilt if she had looked at it long enough. She didn't look at it long enough. There are conditions, she said. All right, you don't get to manage how this goes from here. If I'm walking into that room, I'm walking in as myself, not as a performance of Simone. I'll say the words they need me to say. After that, I make my own decisions. The agreement requires a public marriage. I know what the agreement requires. I read the contract last year when you left it on the dining table and forgot I was in the apartment. She watched his face do something complicated. I'm not an idiot either, Dad. I just never said anything because it wasn't my problem yet. Gregory was quiet for a moment. He'll know you're not Simone. Obviously. You're not worried about that? Zarya looked at it with an expression that contained several years of practice at saying nothing while meaning a great deal. That's his problem, she said. Not mine. Pasik. The cathedral on North State Street was not technically a cathedral. It was a privately owned historic building. High stone walls, arched windows, space for 400 guests, the kind of venue rented for events that required impressiveness without the burden of public scrutiny. The interior had been dressed in dark flowers and low candlelight, arrangements of black orchids and deep burgundy roses lining the aisle in precise intervals. And when Zarya stood in the small antechamber behind the main doors with a black silk veil pressed down over her face, the combined weight of the flower's perfume and her own pulse was almost physical. She was wearing Simone's dress. It was slightly too long and slightly too loose across the shoulders, and these imperfections were somehow more uncomfortable than anything else. The constant small reminder that the dress had been built for someone else's body, someone else's life, someone else's decision to run. Her father stood beside her. He was wearing a dark suit and his silver cufflinks and the expression of a man who had made many difficult decisions in his life and had chosen to stop examining most of them too closely. When you lift the veil, he started. I know. Zarya, Dad. She looked straight ahead at the closed doors. Stop talking. He stopped talking. The music started, low and formal, the kind of processional that felt appropriate to everything this room was. A room full of power and danger dressed in expensive fabric and deliberate calm. A handler opened the doors. Zarya walked. The aisle was long enough that she had time to see the whole room before she reached the altar. She cataloged it the way she always cataloged new spaces, not with social awareness, but with the observational precision of someone who had spent years painting what she noticed. The guests were impeccably dressed. Men in suits that cost more than most people's cars, women in things that caught the light correctly. There were no visible weapons, but the posture of certain people in certain rows communicated that there were weapons. Communicated it with the same quiet certainty as a locked door communicates what's on the other side. Politicians. Business executives. People whose faces she recognized from news coverage, and people whose faces she didn't recognize, but whose stillness suggested they had actively avoided being recognized in news coverage. And at the altar, standing with his back partially turned, was Kang Min-jae. Even from the back, he was a specific kind of presence, tall, not dramatically, but solidly. Black suit that fit him with the kind of precision that came from custom tailoring and a body that knew exactly what it was. Dark hair cut close at the sides, the beginning of ink visible above his collar, the edge of something that probably extended further than the suit allowed to show. He turned when she was 6 feet away. She saw his face clearly through the veil's sheer fabric. Dark eyes, strong jaw. A face that was not quite handsome in the conventional sense, but was intensely specific. It's the kind of face that got described as commanding rather than beautiful. The kind that remembered things and forgot nothing. He was younger than she had expected him to seem. The photographs her father had referenced hadn't prepared her for the quality of his alertness, the way his eyes moved with the precise economy of someone who had trained himself out of wasted motion. He looked at her, and he stopped. Not dramatically, not obviously to anyone more than 2 rows back, but his body registered something in the half-second after he saw her through the veil, a stillness that was different from his earlier stillness. Not composed control, but genuine pause. The kind that happens when the world delivers something the mind hadn't prepared a category for. Zarya stopped beside him. The officiant began to speak. She kept her eyes forward. The ceremony was short. Her father had said 45 minutes, but it was barely 30. The legal language, the formal Korean phrases Min-jae recited with quiet precision, the English vows Zarya repeated in a voice she did not allow to shake because she had decided before she walked through those doors that she would not give anyone in this room the satisfaction of her uncertainty. Then came the veil. Min-jae reached for it. His fingers touched the edge of the silk, and Zarya felt the change in his body before she saw it in his face, the microscopic recalibration in his posture, the fractional adjustment of his breathing. He lifted the veil. He looked at her, and she looked back. For 3 full seconds, neither of them spoke or looked away, and in those 3 seconds, Zarya understood several things simultaneously. That he knew, that he had known, the moment he looked through the veil, that he was deciding right now what to do about it, and that whatever he decided would happen in the next 5 seconds with 400 people watching. She kept her face completely still. She did not apologize with her expression. She did not plead. She met his gaze straight on with the particular quality of exhausted honesty that comes from a person who has spent so long surviving difficulty that one more difficulty has simply been added to the running total. His jaw moved, the smallest possible movement, not anger, something more controlled than anger, assessment. And then Kang Min-jae kissed her. It was brief, contained, the appropriate duration and contact for a wedding ceremony in a room full of witnesses. His hand came up and touched the side of her face, in a gesture that read to the room as tenderness and communicated to Zarya. Something she couldn't name yet. Something careful and specific, and not at all what she had expected from a man whose reputation was built on being completely unpredictable. The room applauded. Zarya did not exhale. She waited until she was certain no one could read her face before she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. She was married, to a man who knew she wasn't who she was supposed to be. And he had said nothing. The reception was held at a private venue 40 minutes from the cathedral, a sprawling modern space with glass walls and catered excess, and the kind of careful, expensive neutrality that could function as the backdrop for either a corporate merger or a criminal power demonstration, which Zarya understood was probably intentional. She was placed at the head table. Min-jae sat beside her. They had not spoken since the ceremony. The motorcade from the cathedral had seated them in the same armored vehicle, separated by a formal and deliberate 12 inches, with 2 of his security people in the front seats. Nobody spoke during the drive. The city moved past the tinted windows in a gray blur, and Zarya sat with her hands in her lap and her veil folded on the seat beside her, and her mind very deliberately focused on the immediate and concrete, because she had found a long time ago that the immediate and concrete was the only manageable territory when everything larger had gone sideways. At the reception table, with champagne glasses being raised around them and conversations in Korean and English, and at least one other language she couldn't identify flowing across the room, Min-jae turned slightly toward her. "Kang Zarya," he said quietly. It was the first time anyone had used her new name. The combination sat strangely in the air between them. "Is that something you decided just now?" she asked. What's your name? My name is Zaria Freeman. Was. He lifted his glass, not to her, but toward the room, a gesture of acknowledgement to someone across the floor. Tell me which one ran. Zaria looked at the table in front of her. Simone? Older sister. Yes. Your father's decision or your own? She turned to look at him directly. Up close, without the ceremony between them, he was more readable than she expected. Not open, not warm, but specific in the way that very controlled people were sometimes more revealing than they intended to be. The careful arrangement of his expression suggested it cost him something to maintain it. Does it matter? She asked. Not legally. He picked up his fork and looked at his plate with the expression of a man who intended to eat it because it was there rather than because he was hungry. Personally, it tells me things. What kind of things? Whether you're a person who acts or a person who gets acted upon. Which do you prefer? He glanced at her sideways. I haven't decided yet. Let me know when you do. He was quiet for a moment. Around them, the room churned with conversation and music and the particular performative warmth of an event where most guests were conducting simultaneous social calculations. A woman in a red dress laughed too loudly at something near the bar. A man in a dark gray suit stood in the corner nearest the exit and drank nothing and watched everything. Your sister, Minjae said. She left a note? Yes. What did it say? That she was sorry, and that she wasn't coming back, and that nobody should look for her. Zaria looked at him. The last part was specifically about you. Something moved behind his eyes. She couldn't classify it. Not hurt exactly, but something adjacent to it. The expression of a man who has been refused something he didn't particularly want, but whose refusal still registered as a statement about his value. Smart woman, he said. She's not wrong to be afraid of you. No. He said it without inflation or apology. She's not. The table beside theirs erupted in laughter at something. A toast was being made across the room. Someone called Minjae's name, and he turned with the smooth precision of a man who had been performing public composure his entire adult life. Raising his glass in acknowledgement, his face arranging itself into the appropriate display of celebration. Zaria watched him do it. She noted how completely he could become whatever the room required. She noted that this was the skill of a man who had survived by understanding what other people needed to see. She noted that she recognized this skill because she had her own version of it. The flight to Vancouver left at 11 that night from a private airfield south of the city. It was not a commercial flight. It was Minjae's personal aircraft, a mid-sized jet, interior dark leather and dim lighting, and the quality of deliberate functionality rather than show. He had money, clearly, but he didn't appear to be interested in performing it. The jet was comfortable. It was not decorative. Zaria sat by the window. Minjae sat across the aisle with a tablet propped on the armrest, going through documents with the focused efficiency of a man who treated every available hour as a resource not to be wasted. Two of his security details sat at the front of the cabin, separated from them by a partial partition. The sound of the engines was constant and low. She had her sketchbook. She always had her sketchbook. It was a hardcover black notebook that she carried in the same bag she'd shoved together in 40 minutes before leaving for the cathedral. Clothes, art supplies, her external hard drive, the 3 books currently in progress on her nightstand, her medication, the small framed photograph of her mother she had taken down from her studio wall at the last second without entirely knowing why. She sketched the window view. Nothing in it. Cloud cover and black sky and the occasional suggestion of light below. You draw, Minjae said. She didn't look up. Yes. Since when? Since I was 7. He said nothing for a moment. Then, are you good? Yes. He seemed to recalibrate slightly at the directness of this. That's an unusual answer. The alternative is to say, I'm not sure, or I'm okay at it. I'm not interested in performing false modesty about the one thing I've been doing seriously for 18 years. She looked up from the sketchbook. I'm very good. Minjae looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully identify. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It wasn't respect, not entirely. It was something more provisional, the expression of a person filing away a fact that didn't fit their existing category for a situation. You agreed to this, he said. The ceremony. Yes. Not because you wanted to. Obviously not. Then why? Zaria looked back at her sketchbook. She was quiet for long enough that the question could have been considered dropped. Then she said, "My mother had criminal exposure if the deal collapsed. My father used it to make sure someone said yes. And you were the one who said yes. I was the one who was available." He was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the cloud shifted and then closed again. "I want you to understand something," he said. "I'm not going to pretend the circumstances of today were acceptable. They weren't. But I keep my agreements, and this agreement has terms that require a visible, functioning marriage for the next 18 months. After that, dissolution is standard. Everything you need will be provided. Everything you want to keep separate will stay separate." "I know. You've read the contract." "Yes." He looked at her for a moment. "Is there anything you want to ask me?" Zarya considered this. "One thing." "Go ahead." "If you knew at the altar, and you knew I could see it, why didn't you say something?" Min-jae looked at the tablet in his hands, which had gone dark while they were talking. He didn't answer immediately. When he did answer, it was with the quality of a man who chose words the way a surgeon chose instruments, not quickly, not casually, with full awareness of what each one would do once deployed. "Because," he said, "the woman standing in front of me looked like she was holding the weight of every person in that room on her back and had decided not to collapse under it." Zarya looked at him. "I respect that kind of endurance," he said, "even when I didn't ask for it." She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she looked back at her sketchbook. "Thank you," she said. "That's all I needed to know." Neither of them spoke again for the remainder of the flight. But sometime in the second hour, when Zarya had set the sketchbook aside and was staring out the window at the dark space where the sky met the mountains, she became aware that Min-jae had stopped working too, that he was looking at the same darkness she was, and that the silence between them had shifted from cold to something less defined. Not warm, not comfortable, not safe by any definition she trusted yet, but different. She told herself it meant nothing. She had been telling herself things meant nothing for 6 years, and she was very good at it. But the thing about Kang Min-jae, the thing she had not been prepared for, the thing that would take weeks to fully understand, was that he was extraordinarily good at noticing the things people were trying not to let him see. And in the 37,000 feet of dark sky between Chicago and Vancouver, he had already noticed her. The limousine that met them at the private airfield drove them up into the hills north of the city, following a road that curled along the cliff edge above the coastline. The Pacific was invisible in the dark, but audible. A distant, persistent sound beneath the wind, the ocean asserting its presence without needing to be seen. The estate appeared at the end of a long private driveway. Massive, modern, all clean lines and dark stone and glass panels that must have faced the water and caught extraordinary light and daylight. Now, in the late hours of what had been one of the longest days of Zarya Freeman's life, it looked like a fortress. The front door was opened before they reached it by a woman who appeared to be in her late 60s, small and extremely upright, with close-cropped steel-gray hair and the expression of someone who had spent decades developing an absolute personal policy of not being surprised by anything. "Madam Yoon-hee," Min-jae said. There was something in his voice when he said her name that was different from everything else Zarya had heard from him today, marginally softer. The particular tone reserved for people who had known you before you became what you currently were. The woman looked at Zarya with the level, unhurried assessment of a person who would decide what she thought of you on her own schedule and could not be rushed. "Your room is prepared," she said to Min-jae. Then to Zarya, without shifting her expression, "Yours as well. Separate wing, as instructed." "Thank you," Zarya said. Yoon-hee looked at her for one more moment, not unfriendly, but thorough. Then she nodded once and stepped aside. The inside of the house was exactly what its exterior promised. Clean, considered, expensive in a way that prioritized space over display. High ceilings, dark wood floors, the kind of furniture that was built to last rather than to impress. Through the far wall of glass, the night showed nothing but the distant shape of the water and the ghost of the mountains behind it. A hallway led to the east wing. A second hallway led to the west. Zarya stood at the junction. Min-jae stopped beside her. He looked down at her, the small height differential suddenly concrete in the stillness of the empty house. In the low interior light, his face looked slightly different than it had in the cathedral. More tired. The composed exterior showing the faintest hairline cracks around the edges. The way things showed their structure when the performance pressure was finally off. "East wing," he said. "Your room is at the end. There's a studio space that was built as a second sitting room. You can use it however you want." She looked at him. You set up a studio. I had it cleared. It gets the best morning light. He said it without particular emphasis, like it was logistical information rather than consideration. Zarya was quiet for a moment. Minjae, she said. Yes? Today was the worst day I've had in a long time. She said it simply, with no demand in it. I'm going to sleep now. Whatever this is, she gestured at the space between them, the house, the night, the entire impossible architecture of the situation they were both standing inside. We can figure it out tomorrow. He looked at her for a moment. Good night, Zarya, he said. It was the first time he'd used only her first name. She walked down the east hallway toward the room she hadn't chosen, in a house she hadn't asked to live in, married to a man she'd met 7 hours ago. Behind her, she heard Minjae's footsteps moving in the opposite direction. And somewhere outside, beyond the glass, the Pacific kept moving, slow and indifferent and ancient, completely unconcerned with the particular smallness of the two people inside that house, and everything they hadn't said yet, and everything they were going to have to survive in order to become, eventually, whatever they were going to become. Zarya closed the bedroom door, sat down on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, and allowed herself exactly 60 seconds to feel the full weight of everything before she put it away, somewhere deep and manageable, and lay down in the dark to wait for morning. She was asleep before she finished counting. In the West Wing, Min-jae sat at the edge of his own bed with his jacket folded over the chair and his phone face down on the nightstand. He wasn't looking at anything in particular. He was running through the events of the day in the precise, systematic way he processed everything, identifying variables, mapping implications, deciding where he had miscalculated. He had expected many things today. He had expected to be angry. He had planned for anger, had rehearsed contingencies for a marriage that began with an insult. He had not expected to find the woman at the altar already aware of the insult, already absorbing it without requiring him to name it, already past the place where apology would have made any difference, standing in borrowed silk in a room full of people who saw her as furniture, looking at him through that veil with eyes that were exhausted and present, and he stopped the thought. His phone lit up on the nightstand. A message from his head of security. Routine confirmation of the overnight perimeter status. Min-jae picked it up. Read it. Set it down. Looked at the ceiling. She read the contract, he thought. A year ago, apparently, and never said anything because it wasn't her problem yet. He lay back on the bed without removing his shoes. Tomorrow there would be security briefings and business matters, and the complex social architecture of introducing his new wife to the people whose opinion of her would determine her safety in his world. Tonight, he was simply going to admit to himself what he already knew, that Kong Zarya was not what he had planned for, and that for the first time in a very long time, he had no idea what came next. 12 days later, Min-jae's phone rang at 3 a.m. from a number he had deleted 3 years ago. He knew before he answered whose voice he would hear. He answered anyway. The phone call lasted 11 minutes. Min-jae sat on the edge of his bed in the dark with his shoes still on and his jacket still folded over the chair and listened to a voice he had not heard in 3 years say his name the way only one person in the world had ever said it. With complete familiarity, like she had never stopped having the right to. Seo-yun, he said, I heard you got married. News travels. In our world, it travels fast. A pause. The quality of her silence was something he had memorized a long time ago. It had texture to it. Not empty, never empty, always containing more than whatever she chose to put into words. Was it everything you hoped for? What do you want? I'm in Vancouver. Another pause. I thought you should hear it from me first. He stood up, walked to the window. Outside, the Pacific was a dark suggestion below the cliff, the sound of it reaching through the glass as a low and constant underpressure. How long? I don't know yet. Business. The word was deliberate. In their shared vocabulary, business had always covered a large and complicated territory. Don't come to the estate. Min-jae. Seo-yun. His voice didn't rise. It never rose with her. That had always been the particular danger of her, that she was one of the only people who could make him feel things so large they produce not noise, but the opposite of noise. Not the estate. A beat of silence, then, I'll be in touch. The call ended. Min-jae stood at the window for a long time after that, long enough that the sky outside began to shift from pure black to the deep, bruised blue-gray that preceded actual dawn, long enough that the bird started before the light, long enough that he made several decisions and unmade them and made them again. Then he set his phone face down on the windowsill and went to take a shower, because there were things that required action and things that required endurance, and the only way to tell the difference before you destroyed something was to let the first impulse pass through you entirely before you moved. Zarya had been in the house for 12 days. In 12 days, she had learned the layout of the estate the way she learned every space she inhabited. Not by being shown, but by moving through it, touching the walls, understanding where the light came from, and at what hours and what it did to the color of surfaces she passed. The east wing was hers. 3 rooms, one of which was the studio Min-jae had cleared for her, and she had spent most of her time there. Canvases set up against the wall, her paints organized the way she always organized them, her music playing through the small portable speakers she'd brought from Chicago, because the silence of the house was too specific in the early hours. The house had staff. 4 of them full-time, plus the security perimeter she had learned to stop noticing except at its edges. Madame Yoon-hee ran everything. She was in the kitchen every morning at 6, not making breakfast, not doing anything in particular that could be named, simply being present in the space with a cup of tea and the expression of a woman who had decided that the kitchen was her territory and the rest of the world was welcome in it only on her terms. The first morning, Zarya had come in at 6:15 in paint-stained overalls looking for coffee, and Yoon-hee had looked at her with the unhurried thoroughness of a custom official at a very particular border. "You drink coffee," Yoon-hee had said. "Black." "Sit down." Zarya sat down. The coffee appeared. It was very good. They did not speak again for several minutes. Then Eun-hee had said, without looking up from whatever she was reading, "The cabinet hinge on the second door to the left is loose, has been for 6 months. 3 different people have been asked to fix it. Do you have a screwdriver? Second drawer." Zarya fixed the hinge. Eun-hee refilled her coffee without being asked. This established between them a relationship that required no further negotiation. Min-jae, in those 12 days, was a presence Zarya felt more than engaged with directly. He was in the house, but he was occupied. Meetings conducted in the study behind closed doors, phone calls that ended when she passed the hallway, the constant low-level activity of a man who ran a large and complex operation, and treated his own home primarily as a base of operations. They ate dinner together 4 times. The conversations were careful and lateral, moving around the edges of anything real. But the kitchen happened. It happened accidentally the 3rd night. Zarya couldn't sleep, which was normal for her, and she'd come down at 2 in the morning to make tea and found Min-jae at the kitchen table with a half-eaten bowl of leftovers and a document he closed when she walked in. They had both paused in the slight awkwardness of unexpected proximity and then simply not left, because leaving would have required more deliberate decision than staying. They talked for an hour that night. Nothing important. The kind of conversation that happened when 2 people were too tired to perform and accidentally defaulted to honesty. She talked about the unfinished canvas in the studio, the way she had been trying to work out the color for 3 weeks. He talked about a building in Seoul he had spent 2 years trying to acquire for legitimate development and kept losing to a rival who operated without ethical constraint. Neither of them said anything about the wedding or the contract or what the next 18 months was supposed to look like. It happened again on night 5. Night 8, night 11. The 11th night, he had brought out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, and she had looked at the glass for a moment before pushing it slightly to the side, and he had not asked why, just moved both glasses to his own side and poured only one, and this small adjustment landed in her chest somewhere she wasn't prepared for it to land. She told herself it meant nothing. The morning after his 3 a.m. phone call, she noticed the difference before she understood what it was. He came down late, which was unusual. He was typically in the kitchen before her by the time she arrived at 6:15. He arrived at 7 with the contained quality of a man who had made himself fully presentable while running on almost no sleep, and he said good morning to both her and Yoon-hee and poured his coffee and went directly to the study without sitting down. Zarya looked at Yoon-hee over her cup. Eun-hee looked back with absolutely no expression on her face. "Something happened," Zarya said. "I didn't say anything." "I know." Yoon-hee picked up her tea. "Things from before sometimes come back," she said very carefully, like a person reading precisely from a prepared statement and not one word further. "This is a house that has seen that before." Zarya sat with that for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee and went to the studio. She was on her 3rd hour of working when Min-jae appeared in the studio doorway. She heard him before she saw him, not his footsteps, but the change in the quality of the air, the particular atmospheric shift of someone filling a doorway. She kept her brush on the canvas for another 3 strokes before she looked up. He was in the doorway. He had changed from the morning into something more casual, dark pants, a light gray shirt with the sleeves rolled back, and she could see more of the tattoos that disappeared beneath his collars and cuffs. They were not decorative. They were something else. The particular organized language of a life documented in permanent ink, each element specific to a history she hadn't asked about yet. "Can I come in?" he asked. Nobody had ever asked before coming into her studio. The question landed strangely. "Yes," she said. He came in and stood near the door, looking at the canvas. It was the large gray-blue study she had been working on since Chicago, the one she still hadn't resolved. In the past 12 days, she had added layers, darker in one corner, a suggestion of something angular pushing through from beneath the surface. It still wasn't what it wanted to be, but it was closer. "What is it?" he asked. "I don't know yet." "Does it have to be something?" "No, but it usually turns out to be something whether I plan it or not." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the canvas with the focused, non-performative attention of someone who was actually looking rather than demonstrating interest in looking. She appreciated the difference. "I need to tell you something," he said. She set her brush down, picked up the rag, turned to face him properly. "Someone I used to know is in Vancouver," he said. "I found out last night. She's here for business, her own. Nothing to do with you directly." "She? Her name is Han Seo-yoon. We were—" He paused. A fractional pause, barely perceptible, but she caught it. "There was a relationship, several years ago. It ended." Zarya looked at him. "Why are you telling me?" "Because it will reach you anyway. People in my circle will mention it. They'll want to watch how you respond. I'd rather you hear it from me first than perform a reaction you weren't prepared for." She considered this. "Is she dangerous?" "To you? No." "To you?" He was quiet for a moment longer than the answer should have required. "History is always dangerous," he said, "in the sense that it doesn't fully resolve. It just goes dormant." "That's not a no." "It's the most honest answer I have." Zarya turned back to the canvas, picked up her brush, made one stroke that she looked at for a moment, and then decided she didn't like. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I mean that. It was the right call." He was quiet for a beat. "Are you angry?" "I'm not your girlfriend. I'm not going to be angry that you have a history." She looked at him. "I'd be angry if you hid it." "All right." He nodded once, turned to go. "Minjai." He stopped. "You should sleep," she said. "You look terrible." Something moved in his face that was very close to surprise. "People don't usually say that to me." "I know. That's probably part of your problem." He looked at her for one more moment. Then, barely, the smallest possible concession of his composure. "Good night, Zarya." "It's 8 in the morning." "I'm aware." He left. She looked at her canvas for a moment. Then she started painting again, and the darkness in the corner got deeper and more deliberate, and she didn't think about why. Seo-yoon came to the charity gala. The event was held 3 days later at a hotel in downtown Vancouver, a fundraiser for a children's medical foundation, the kind of event that functioned simultaneously as legitimate philanthropy and social territory marking for the upper strata of the Pacific Northwest's complicated financial ecosystem. Minjae attended these things regularly. The optics of charitable participation were, as he had once explained to Zarya with the flat pragmatism that was becoming familiar to her, excellent cover for several kinds of conversation that couldn't happen in office buildings. He had asked her to come, not demanded. Asked, with the specific phrasing of someone who was making a request rather than issuing an instruction, which Zarya noted because she paid attention to such distinctions. She wore a dark emerald dress she had bought online without telling anyone, arrived at, and had an argument with herself about in the East Wing bathroom for 20 minutes before putting on. It fit her correctly. Not Simone's way, not built for someone else's body, but hers. She had spent so many years choosing clothes for invisibility that choosing something for presence felt almost transgressive. Eunhee saw her in the hallway before they left. The old woman stopped walking and looked at her for a full 3 seconds, which from Eunhee was the equivalent of a standing ovation. "Good," she said, "just that," and walked away. The gala was everything Zarya had catalogued from the wedding magnified and mixed with a veneer of social warmth that made it more difficult to navigate, not less. She moved through the room with Minjae's hand resting at the small of her back. Not possessive, just present, a physical grounding that she was surprised to find she didn't mind, and understood quickly that she was being assessed by everyone in the room simultaneously, the assessment running along several axes. Was she impressive enough? Was she controllable enough? Was she a strategic asset or a liability in the complicated social mathematics of the world she had married into? She found to her own surprise that she didn't care. She had spent so many years trying to be invisible in rooms that didn't want to see her. She had forgotten how to care about the assessments of rooms that saw her as decoration. The forgetting felt clean. Dinner was seated. She was placed between Minjae and a man named Park, who ran a shipping operation out of Seattle and spent the first course explaining his business to her and the patient, simplified way that men sometimes used with women they had decided were primarily decorative. She let him finish. Then she asked 3 questions that demonstrated she understood the regulatory environment for Pacific shipping operations and the specific vulnerability his business model had to recent changes in cross-border asset classification. Park stared at her for a moment. Minjae, to her left, did not look at her. But she felt the particular quality of his stillness shift. Across the table there was a man, mid-50s, well-dressed, the comfortable confidence of old money, who had been speaking loudly for most of dinner about a redevelopment project on the city's eastern waterfront. Zarya had been listening with part of her attention. The project involved the demolition of 3 blocks of older housing and the displacement of approximately 400 immigrant families who had lived in the area for decades, in exchange for luxury condominiums that the man described as elevating the neighborhood's profile. She let him finish that sentence. Then she said, "What happens to the families?" The table went quiet. The man looked at her with the expression of someone who had not anticipated a question from the decorative direction. "I beg your pardon?" "The 400 families in the current housing. What's the relocation plan? Because the eastern waterfront is one of the few areas in this city with affordable access to the transit line, and if you're removing that, there are standard displacement protocols. Those protocols have a 6 to 8 month processing period during which families are in temporary housing without school continuity for their children. I'm asking what your specific plan is, not what the standard protocol is." The silence at the table had a particular quality to it, not hostile, but watchful, the kind of silence that happened when a room recalibrated. The man's face had gone slightly red. "I don't think this is the appropriate motu. I'm asking a direct question about a public development project at a dinner table," Zarya said. "I'm not sure what's inappropriate about that." And then Minjae laughed. She heard it before she processed what it was. A sound she had not heard from him before, low and genuine and entirely unperformed, lasting only 3 seconds before he brought it back under control. But 3 seconds was enough. Several people at the table looked at him with the expression of people who were recalibrating something. He caught her eye, and there was something in his face, not just amusement, but something behind it, something that looked briefly, completely unguarded. She looked away first. After dinner, during the reception portion of the evening, she went to get a glass of water from the bar and came back to find Minjae in quiet conversation with a woman she hadn't seen before. She understood immediately who it was. Han Seoyun was tall and narrow-shouldered in a dark dress that was perfectly selected, with the kind of composed elegance that came not from effort, but from years of inhabiting elegance until it became structural. She was beautiful in a way that was almost architectural, everything arranged with careful intention. She was looking at Minjae with the particular expression of someone who knew the full map of a person and was using that knowledge in real time. Minjae saw Zarya approaching. Something crossed his face, a decision made quickly. "Zarya," he said, "come here." She came. She stood beside him. He placed his hand at her back, the same grounding gesture from earlier. "Han Seoyun," he said, "my wife, Zarya." Seoyun looked at her with the careful assessment of a woman who had also been assessed throughout her life and had developed exquisite precision in return. "I've heard about you," she said. "Congratulations on the marriage." "Thank you," Zarya said. "It must have been quite a whirlwind. Minjae and I used to say he would never marry." "People change," Zarya said. "Do they?" Seoyun smiled. It was a very controlled smile, the kind that communicated warmth to a room while saying something else entirely to its target. Or do they simply adapt to their circumstances? Zarya looked at her for a moment, then, In my experience, the people who adapt without changing are the most dangerous kind, because they learn to look like something they're not. Seo-yoon's smile held for exactly one beat. Then it adjusted, not disappearing, but becoming something more genuine, something that acknowledged a direct hit with the small, reluctant respect of a person who appreciated the skill even while absorbing the damage. "Excuse me," Seo-yoon said. "I see someone I need to speak with." She moved away. Min-jae was very still for a moment. Then, quietly, not quite looking at her, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Zarya said. "It'll make things more complicated." "Probably." She picked up her water glass. "She came here to see how I'd respond. I just told her." He was quiet. She could feel him processing. Then, low enough that it was only for her, "Are you all right?" It was the second time he had asked her that. The first time had been on the flight from Chicago. Both times with the same quality. Not performance, not management, but something that had the weight of actual wanting to know. "I'm fine," she said. It was mostly true. She stood beside him for the rest of the evening, and she did not look for Seo-yoon in the crowd again, because looking would have communicated something she wasn't prepared to examine. Seo-yoon's business in Vancouver did not conclude quickly. It extended. A week became 2. Min-jae's behavior in the house changed in ways that were subtle and cumulative. The way weather changed, the way erosion worked, not in a single dramatic event, but in the slow accumulation of small adjustments that eventually produced an unmistakable alteration in the landscape. The kitchen visits stopped, not suddenly. First they became shorter, then every other night, then not at all. He moved his work earlier, his evenings later, the closed study door becoming a permanent feature of the house's atmosphere. Zarya noted it without addressing it. She had no language for addressing it that didn't require claiming something she had told herself she hadn't claimed. She went to the studio. She painted. She fixed a cracked tile in the East Wing bathroom that had been cracked since before she arrived, and that no one had apparently found worth attending to. She ate breakfast with Yoon-hee. She read. She ran the cliff path in the mornings, which she had started the second week because the house was beginning to feel like something she needed to escape from at intervals in order to return to. One of Min-jae's security team, a younger man named Tae, who was assigned primarily to the estate's interior perimeter, had started joining her on the cliff path. Not because he was required to, she gathered, but because he had seen her going out alone on the 4th morning and had looked uncomfortable enough about it that she had told him he could come if he wanted. He was quiet and earnest and 26, and deeply out of his depth around her in a way she found genuine rather than irritating. "Does it bother you?" he asked one morning, about 2 weeks after the gala, as they reached the southern point of the path where the cliff dropped cleanly to the water. "Not knowing anyone here?" "I'm used to not knowing people," Zarya said. "That's not—" He stopped. Recalibrated. He was careful with words in the way of a person who had learned that careless words in his line of work had consequences. "That's not a good way to live." "No," she agreed. "It's not." They stood for a moment looking at the water. Below them, the Pacific was gray-green and cold-looking, moving in its enormous, indifferent way. "He's different," Tae said. "When you're in the room." She looked at him. "Don't." "I'm not trying to—" "Tae." Her voice was quiet and specific. "Don't." He looked away. "Yes, ma'am." They ran back in silence. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday. It happened the way confrontations usually did, not because anyone planned it, but because things that have been accumulating past their capacity to be contained eventually find their own exit. It was 11 at night. The house was quiet. Zarya had been in the studio for 6 hours working on a piece that had stopped making sense to her around hour 4, but that she had kept working anyway because stopping would have required her to sit in the particular quality of the house's recent silence. She came out for water. Min-jae was coming out of the study at the same moment. They both stopped in the hallway. He looked tired, more than tired, eroded specifically, in the way of a person who had been managing something expensive for a sustained period. The composure was still there, but it had the quality of something being maintained through effort rather than ease. "Late," she said. "Yes." He didn't offer more. She moved toward the kitchen. He followed, which she read as not intentional. He was heading to the same destination, and her route happened to overlap. They stood in the kitchen in the particular arrangement of 2 people who had discovered over 3 weeks of late-night occupation that each had a specific location in the room. She stood at the counter near the window, he stood near the island. and the arrangements had become habitual enough that they both moved toward their positions automatically before either acknowledged having done so. She filled her glass. He opened the refrigerator, looked into it, and closed it again without taking anything. The silence was different from the ones that had preceded it. It had a tension in it that the earlier silences hadn't. Those had been easy, companionable, in the accidental way of two people in proximity who had run out of the energy required for performance. This silence had something pressing against it. "Are you meeting with her?" Zarya asked. Min-jae turned. "What? Seo-yun?" She kept her voice completely level. "Are you meeting with her?" A pause that was 3 seconds long. "We've had 2 meetings, business-related." "Business?" "Zarya, I'm not accusing you of anything." She looked at him. "I'm asking a factual question about whether you're meeting with someone, because you stopped coming to the kitchen and you stopped being present in this house in any way that isn't functional, and I'm trying to understand whether that's about her or about something else." He was quiet for a moment. The quality of his silence was doing something she recognized. It had the specific compressed quality of a person holding several competing things simultaneously, deciding in real time which one could be safely released and which needed to stay contained. "She's requesting my involvement in something," he said, "a business negotiation that crosses into territory I don't normally operate in. And you're considering it." "I'm considering the implications of it." "What are the implications?" He looked at her. "That's not something I need to share with you at this stage." The words hit differently than he probably intended. Not cruel, matter of fact, the language of a man who had spent years operating in compartments and had not yet fully recalibrated for what this particular domestic arrangement actually required of him. Zarya set her water glass down on the counter. "Okay," she said. "Zarya." "No, I heard you." Her voice was still level. That was one of the things about her. The anger didn't produce volume. It went inward and sharpened. "I understand that there are things about your operation that aren't my business. That's fine. But the kitchen conversations were real, Min-jae. The late nights were real. And you've shut all of it down without saying a word about why. And I've been sitting in this house watching you manage me the same way I suspect you manage everyone who gets too close to something you don't know how to handle." He said nothing. "If it's Seo-yun, if seeing her again has—" She stopped, restarted. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know what she is to you. You told me yourself, and I'm not asking you to choose anything or feel anything you don't feel. But I need you to be honest with me about what's happening, because I came here with nothing, and I've been building something in this house, and if you're going to dismantle it, I need to know so I can—" "You've been building something," he said. She stopped. He had moved slightly, not toward her, but his posture had shifted, the contained quality of his bearing loosening fractionally in a way she had learned to read, as him arriving somewhere he hadn't planned to go. "You don't see yourself doing it," he said. "But I've been watching. The hinge, the bathroom tile, the way Tay started running again after 3 months of not running because you told him the cliff path was good, the way Yun-hee laughs in the mornings now, which she didn't before you came." He paused. "The way this house stopped feeling like a base and started feeling like a—" He stopped. "Like a what?" she asked. He didn't finish the sentence. The kitchen was very quiet around them. The rain had started outside. She could hear it against the glass. The Pacific weather arriving without ceremony. "Seo-yun asked me to meet her tonight," he said. "I said no." His voice was very even. "I said no because there are things happening in this house that I don't want to damage by being careless. And then I spent the last 4 hours in that study trying to figure out whether the thing I'm protecting is a business asset or—" He stopped again. The sentence hung between them. Zarya looked at him. The rain came harder against the windows. Somewhere in the east wing, one of the glass panels shuddered in its frame. "Min-jae," she said quietly. "I know," he said. Like she had asked a question, like he already knew both the question and the answer and was not ready for either. The moment was dense and fragile in equal measure, the kind that existed in the thin space between two people before everything irrevocably shifted, the last point where retreat was still technically possible, where the accumulated weight of 3 weeks of late nights and careful conversations and small deliberate adjustments could still be called coincidence if either of them needed it to be. Zarya picked up her water glass. "Come to the kitchen tomorrow morning," she said. He looked at her. 6:15, she said. "Same as before." She walked to the door. At the threshold she stopped without fully turning. "Don't make me ask twice," she said. She went back to the east wing. She lay awake for 2 hours listening to the rain. At 6:14 the next morning, she came into the kitchen. At 6:15, she heard his footsteps in the hallway. But when she turned, it wasn't Min-jae standing in the kitchen doorway. It was Han Seo-yun, standing in Min-jae's house in the early morning light, wearing the expression of a woman who had spent the night somewhere she had no right to be and wanted Zarya to understand exactly what that meant. "I think," Seo-yun said in the careful English she deployed like a precision instrument, "that you and I should have a conversation." Zarya did not move. That was the first thing. The absolute stillness that overtook her body the moment she registered who was standing in the kitchen doorway. Not the stillness of shock exactly, but the specific muscular stillness of a person whose instincts had taken over before the conscious mind had time to produce a response. The kind of stillness that preceded either flight or confrontation and hadn't yet decided which. Han Seo-yun stood in the threshold with the particular composure of a woman who had rehearsed this moment. Her hair was down. She was wearing a silk blouse in dark ivory and tailored trousers and low heels, dressed with the precise calibration of someone who understood that appearing to have made effort was almost as dangerous as appearing not to have made any. She looked like she had slept well. She looked like she had slept here. Zarya looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then she set her water glass down on the counter with a very small, very controlled click and said, "How did you get into this house?" Not a question, a demand. Seo-yun came further into the kitchen with the unhurried movement of a woman who did not recognize the concept of rooms she wasn't welcome in. "Min-jae and I spoke last night, after your conversation with him." She moved to the far side of the island and stood with her hands resting lightly on the counter's edge. "He called me. He called you. To end things clearly, I appreciated the directness." She looked at Zarya with the expression of someone delivering information rather than wielding it, which Zarya knew by now was a distinction without a real difference. "I came this morning because I wanted to speak with you before I left Vancouver. He isn't here. He left early. There was something at the port. I spoke with Madame Yunhee, and she let me wait." Zarya looked toward the hallway. The house had the early morning quality of specific silence. Yunhee was somewhere in the east corridor, probably aware of exactly what was happening and choosing, with deliberate precision, not to intervene. "Say what you came to say," Zarya said. Seo-yun was quiet for a moment. She looked around the kitchen with the slow, assessing gaze of someone reading a room for information. The coffee cups drying by the sink, the small portable speaker Zarya had moved from the studio 3 weeks ago and left on the counter because the mornings were better with music, the fixed cabinet hinge that sat straight now in its frame. "You've made yourself at home," Seo-yun said. "It is my home. It was mine once." She said it without aggression, almost gently, which was worse. "Not this house, but his life. The structure of it." She paused. "I'm not here to threaten you. I want to be clear about that." "I know exactly why you're here," Zarya said. "Do you? You're here because you spent 2 weeks watching how I operate, and you've decided I'm a real variable. Not a temporary wife, not a contract arrangement, an actual variable." Zarya looked at her steadily. "And you want to know how much I know and how much I'll fight." Seo-yun looked at her for a moment with something that might have been genuine respect if the circumstances had been different. "There's a deal," Seo-yun said. "Min-jae told you it was a business negotiation. That's accurate as far as it goes." She looked at the counter. "What he didn't tell you is what the negotiation involves, what I've been asking him to authorize." "Tell me." "A partnership. Restructuring the distribution network through 3 new Southeast Asian corridors. It requires Min-jae's territory clearance and his legitimacy infrastructure, the legal businesses, the political connections he's built." She paused. "And it requires him to quietly remove certain protections he currently has in place. For specific people." The air in the kitchen shifted almost imperceptibly. "Which people?" Zarya said. "Your father." Seo-yun met her eyes. "Gregory Freeman's legal cover runs through Min-jae's network. The arrangement was part of the original merger agreement. If Min-jae withdraws the protection, quietly, with documentation that makes it look like Freeman's side breached first, your father faces the federal exposure that was always waiting for him, and your mother along with him." The room was very quiet. "Why are you telling me this?" Zarya said. "Because Min-jae refused." Seo-yun's voice was completely even. "Last night, he called me to say no, and I need you to understand what that means, what he gave up by saying no. The Southeast Asian deal is worth more than anything in his current portfolio. He declined it to protect an arrangement that protects your family. She looked at Zarya directly. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what this marriage is actually costing him, and because I want you to understand that the people who will come after this deal, the people I represent, are not going to stop asking. Zarya did not look away. She kept her face still with the practiced control of a woman who had learned young that letting people see the full extent of your reaction gave them a tool they would use. But her hands, pressed flat against the counter behind her, were not still. You represent someone, she said. I have my own interests, and my interests are sometimes aligned with people who operate at a level that makes even Minji's network look manageable. She said it without theatrics, which made it more frightening than theatrics would have. He knows this. He knew it when he called last night. He said no anyway. And you came here to tell me this because the people I represent will next approach your father directly. Seo Yun picked up her bag from the stool at the end of the island. She had put it there when she came in. Zarya, now registered, had organized herself in this kitchen with the ease of someone who had stood in it many times before. And your father is not Min Jae. Your father will say yes to protect himself and not understand the full weight of what he's agreed to until it's too late to undo it. She moved toward the door. I'm leaving Vancouver today, she said. This conversation didn't happen, as far as Min Jae is concerned. What you do with it is your choice. She stopped at the threshold, turned once more. You're not what I expected. No, Zarya said. He made the right choice. She said it quietly, almost to herself. That's the part that's hardest. She walked out. Zarya stood in the kitchen for a long time after the sound of footsteps faded. Then she picked up her phone. Then she set it down. Then she sat down on the floor, not dramatically, just because her legs had made the decision before she did. And she sat with her back against the cabinet and her knees pulled up, and her eyes focused on a fixed point on the tile floor, and she let herself feel the full shape of what had just landed on her, the way she had been taught by years of practice to let the worst things fully arrive before she decided what to do about them. Her father had always been the variable she couldn't control. She had known this. She had built her entire interior life around managing the fallout of Gregory Freeman's decisions while removing herself as much as possible from the blast radius. She had watched him operate for 25 years. The deals, the compromises, the willingness to sacrifice whatever was available in service of what he needed to protect. She had watched him sacrifice Simone's autonomy without a second visible thought. She had been the next available sacrifice. And now she was sitting on the floor of a kitchen in a house she hadn't chosen, in a city she hadn't known 6 weeks ago, married to a man who had turned down a fortune to keep her parents out of a federal indictment, while the woman he had once loved was getting on a plane to go meet people who were going to destroy her family from a different angle. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, breathed, counted to 8, the way she'd been doing since she was 20, and her therapist had given her this tool in a small gray office in Chicago's West Side. Breathed again. Then she got up off the floor, poured herself coffee, and called her father. Gregory Freeman answered on the second ring, which meant he was awake, and had been awake for a while, which meant something was already moving. Zarya, have you been contacted by anyone in the last 48 hours? Someone representing a business interest from Southeast Asia or connected to Han Seo-yun? A pause. 1 second too long. Where's this coming from? He asked. Dad, answer the question. Another pause. She could hear him breathing, could hear the specific quality of his breathing that she had learned in childhood to recognize as the sound of a man deciding how much to tell. There was a preliminary conversation, he said, 2 days ago. A representative from a Singapore-based investment group. Did you agree to anything? I agreed to a follow-up meeting. Cancel it. Zarya. Cancel the meeting, Dad. Her voice was not raised. It was very, very quiet. These are not people you understand how to manage. They approached you because Min Jae said no to them, and they're looking for a different leverage point, and that leverage point is you. Silence. How do you know about this? He asked. Because I live in his house, and I pay attention. She set her coffee down. Cancel the meeting. Don't speak to them again. And then you're going to tell me everything about the legal exposure that you used to get me to walk down that aisle, because I read the contract, but there was clearly more than the contract. There are things that are complicated. Gregory. It was the first time she had used his name. Not Dad. His name. The weight of it changed the quality of the line between them. I am standing in the middle of something that is significantly larger and more dangerous than you told me it was. I am here because you put me here, and I need the full picture or I cannot protect you from what's coming. A very long silence. How bad is it? He said finally. Bad enough that Minji refused a 9-figure deal to keep your legal cover intact. She picked up her coffee again. How bad is it on your end? The silence stretched. Then, with the particular defeated quality of a man releasing something he had been holding for a long time. The federal investigation is further along than I said. There are documents. He stopped. There are documents that were supposed to be inaccessible through Minjae's legal network. If his cover withdraws, they become accessible inside of 72 hours. Documents about what specifically? About the original financing structure for the Freeman Group from 15 years ago. He paused. Before it was legitimate. Before any of it was legitimate. The kitchen was completely silent around her. Mom knew, Zarya said. Your mother was my business partner before she was your mother. She knew everything. His voice had aged 10 years in the span of one phone call. Zarya, cancel the meeting, she said. Today. Then don't move. I'll call you. She hung up. She stood at the kitchen window and looked at the Pacific. The morning was gray, low cloud cover pressing flat against the water, no visible horizon. The world ending at a gray wall 30 feet out. She was still standing there when she heard Minjae's car on the drive. She heard him come in. Heard him speak to one of the security team in the entrance hall, the low, brief exchange of a man checking in on the status of his perimeter. Heard his footsteps cross the entrance marble and move toward the study. She intercepted him in the hallway. He stopped when he saw her face. Whatever he had been carrying from the morning, the port, the meeting, whatever had pulled him out before dawn, he set it down in his expression. That was something she had learned about him in 6 weeks. He was capable of genuine presence when something required it, of actually arriving in a moment rather than managing it from outside. He arrived now. What happened? He said. Seo-Yun was here. His jaw tightened, one small controlled motion. She came to the house. Eun-hee let her wait. She talked to me. Zarya watched his face. She told me about the deal, about my father's exposure, about what you declined last night. He was very still. You should have told me, she said. It was my family, my parents. Whatever calculation you were making about whether I needed to know, you made the wrong one. Her voice was even, but there was something underneath it that was not even, something that had been building for 6 weeks and had been given a shape this morning it couldn't be put back into. You have been making decisions about what I can handle since the day you lifted that veil, and I understand why. I came from nowhere. I was placed in your life without your consent. You had no reason to trust my judgment. Zarya. Let me finish. She looked at him. I called my father. He's been approached. He's already agreed to a follow-up meeting, and he doesn't understand what he's walked into. The documents they're threatening to surface would end both of my parents. Not financially, criminally. She paused. And the people Seo-Yun represents, they're going to keep moving regardless of what you or I decide. Because the deal you declined is going to happen with or without your authorization if they can find another entry point. My father is that entry point. Minjae was quiet for a moment, then, how much did she tell you? Enough. She looked at him steadily. How much were you not going to tell me? He looked at the wall past her shoulder, then back at her. All of it, he said. I wasn't going to tell you any of it. Why? Because it required me to admit that the arrangement your father made, the merger, the marriage, all of it, was never about a simple business deal. My network has been carrying your family's legal exposure for 4 years, Zarya. Your father didn't just need a business alliance. He needed a shield, and he sold you to get one. His voice was completely flat. Not cruel, just factual in the devastating way that some facts were. I thought if you knew that, you thought I'd fall apart. I thought it would be one more thing you were carrying that I put there. The hallway was quiet around them. Somewhere in the east wing, the sound of Eun-hee moving through the corridor, deliberately creating noise to announce her own distance from this conversation. Zarya looked at him for a long time. I've been carrying things my entire life, she said. The difference between what I can handle and what I can't has nothing to do with the weight. It has to do with whether someone trusts me enough to tell me what I'm actually lifting. Something shifted in his face. Not breaking. Minjae didn't break. She understood that now. His structural integrity was too deep for surface fractures. But something behind his eyes adjusted, recalibrated around something it hadn't been accounting for. My father needs to cancel that meeting, she said. And then we need a plan, because the people Seo Yun represents are not going to absorb this refusal and walk away. They're going to come through a different door, and they're going to come soon. She paused. I can help you. But not if you keep making decisions about what I'm allowed to know inside my own life. He looked at her for a moment. What kind of help? I know my father. I know how he moves, how he makes decisions, what he's afraid of, and what he'll sacrifice when he's afraid. That's information you don't have and can't buy. She held his gaze. Use it. Min-jae was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, I need to make some calls. I know. This gets complicated from here. I know that too. He moved past her toward the study. At the door, he stopped without turning. Zarya. His voice was different, stripped of its management layer down to something more direct beneath. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. She looked at the closed door after he went through it. I know, she said, to the empty hallway. The call that broke everything came at 4 in the afternoon. It came to Min-jae's phone first. Then, 11 minutes later, to hers. Her father's voice when she answered was not the voice of Gregory Freeman, the executive, the operator, the man who had spent 40 years engineering outcomes. It was the voice of a frightened 61-year-old man who had finally run out of moves. They didn't wait, he said. The follow-up meeting. I called to cancel it, and they told me. His breath was audible, ragged at the edges. Zarya, they already filed. The documentation. The federal attorney's office received a package this morning, an anonymous submission. She was already walking toward the study. How much? 15 years? Everything. His voice cracked on the last word. Just slightly. Just enough. Your mother's name is on half of it. She pushed open the study door. Min-jae was on the phone. He looked up when she came in. He had heard. She could tell from his face that he had already known for 11 minutes and had been deciding, in that 11 minutes, with the door closed, what to tell her and how. She looked at him across the room. When did you know? She said, not into her own phone, at him. He lowered his phone from his ear. She said it again, very quietly. When did you know they were going to file? He held her gaze. This morning, before I left for the port, my contact at the Federal Liaison Office sent a warning. Before Seo Yun came here. Yes. The word landed in the room like something dropped from height. Simple, irrecoverable. She had spent the morning thinking she had information, thinking the conversation with Seo Yun had given her a window, had given her and Min-jae time to build a response. She had called her father. She had confronted Min-jae in the hallway. She had offered herself as a resource and asked to be trusted. And the entire time, the documents were already moving. The entire time, Min-jae had known. She stood very still in the study doorway with her phone at her side, and her father's voice still audible through it, saying her name in the small, cracked way of a man who had finally reached the bottom of the hole he'd spent a lifetime digging. And she looked at the man she had married and understood that the things she had been building carefully, incrementally, in the kitchen and the hallway and the studio and the cliff path at dawn, had been built on ground that was already moving. Zarya, Min-jae said. She raised her phone back to her ear. Dad, she said. Her voice was completely steady. Don't say anything else to anyone, not the attorney, not Mom, not anyone. I'll call you back in 1 hour. She hung up. She looked at Min-jae. Sit down, she said. He sat. She closed the study door behind her, and she walked to the chair across from his desk, and she sat down too. And in the silence before either of them spoke, she could hear the Pacific outside the glass. That same distant, constant sound, ancient and entirely indifferent to the specific human disaster assembling itself in this room. And she told herself that she was not going to let the ground keep moving, that she was going to plant her feet and find the bedrock beneath all of it, that she had survived worse than this in smaller rooms with less. She had survived worse. She pressed that thought down into her bones where she kept the things she needed most. And then she looked at Kang Min-jae across the desk and said, in the voice of a woman who was done being managed and done being protected from the shape of her own life, tell me everything. From the beginning, all of it. And if you leave out one single, Min-jae told her everything. It took 40 minutes. He sat behind the desk with his hands flat on the surface in front of him, and he spoke in the measured, precise way of a man dismantling his own architecture, one load-bearing piece at a time, and Zarya sat across from him and listened without interrupting and kept her face very still and let it all arrive. The Freeman Group's original financing, 15 years of shell structures and offshore accounts and document chains that Gregory had spent a decade slowly legitimizing through Min Jae's legal network. The federal investigation that had been running parallel to the merger negotiations for 2 years, quietly, fed by an inside source that Min Jae had suspected but not confirmed until 6 weeks ago. The full weight of what the marriage had actually been, not just a business alliance, but a desperate attempt by Gregory Freeman to fold himself so completely inside Min Jae's legal infrastructure that extracting him would require extracting Min Jae too. The inside source. That was the part that landed last and hardest. "Who?" Zarya said. Min Jae was quiet for 1 second. "Someone inside your father's organization. Someone who had been feeding documentation to the federal attorney's office for 18 months before the merger was finalized." He paused. "Someone who also made initial contact with Seo Yoon's principals 8 months ago. Someone my father trusted." "Yes." "Do you know who?" "I have a name." He held her gaze. "I've had it for 3 weeks." The room was completely quiet. "3 weeks," she said. "I needed to confirm it before I moved. Moving on the wrong name in this kind of situation. 3 weeks." Her voice was soft. The particular softness that was the opposite of gentleness. "Min Jae, for 3 weeks you have been sitting on the name of the person who is dismantling my family, and you did not tell me." "It wasn't confirmed." "It's my family." She stood up, walked to the window. The Pacific outside was the same, indifferent, enormous, entirely unconcerned. She pressed one hand flat against the glass and let the cold of it travel up through her palm and into her wrist. "Give me the name." "Zarya." "The name." He was quiet for one more moment, then, "Marcus Webb, your father's chief financial officer." She knew the name. She had known Marcus Webb her entire life, a trim, careful man in his 50s who had worked for her father since before she was born, who had sat at every Freeman family holiday dinner for 2 decades, who had given her a card when she graduated from art school with a modest check inside and a handwritten note that said Gregory's Quiet One. "I always knew you'd find your way." She stood at the window and breathed. "He's been cooperating with federal prosecutors," Min Jae said. "Not because he was caught, voluntarily. He approached them. He built the case himself over 18 months and then shopped it to Seo Yoon's people when he realized the federal case alone wasn't moving fast enough." "What does he want?" "Control of the Freeman Group's remaining legitimate assets. His name on the books instead of your father's." Min Jae paused. "He's been your father's shadow for 30 years. He wants to stop being the shadow." Zarya turned from the window. Her face had the quality it sometimes had in the studio when she had finally understood what a painting was trying to become. Not relief, not satisfaction, but the specific settled clarity of a thing that had stopped being ambiguous. "The package that was filed this morning with the federal attorney, can it be countered?" "Not directly. The documentation is legitimate. Then it has to be discredited at its source." She crossed back to the desk and stood in front of it. "Webb. He filed voluntarily, you said, which means he's a cooperating witness, which means he has a deal in place." She looked at Min Jae. "What happens to a cooperating witness's deal if it comes out that the witness was also working with a foreign criminal enterprise to leverage the same documentation for private financial gain?" Min Jae looked at her. "It's illegal to be a federal informant and simultaneously sell the same information to a third party for personal profit," she said. "It voids the cooperation agreement. It potentially makes him the subject of his own investigation." She held his gaze. "You've had his name for 3 weeks. Do you have documentation of his contact with Seo Yoon's people?" A pause. Then, "Yes." "Then we need to move today, tonight." She planted both hands on the desk. "Who do you have at the federal attorney's office?" "A contact, not inside but adjacent. A defense attorney who has standing relationships with the prosecutors on the investigation. Can he get a communication through today?" "If I ask him to." "Then ask." She straightened. "And I need to talk to Webb." Min Jae stood up. "No." "Min Jae, you're not going near Marcus Webb." His voice had shifted register. Not louder, but lower, the particular compression of a man putting his full weight behind a boundary. "He's been building this case for 18 months with foreign criminal backing. He is not a man you walk up to and have a conversation with. He's a man who has known me since I was 5 years old." She looked at him. "That's exactly what I'm going to use." "Zarya, If he knows the documentation has been compromised, if he understands that his cooperation agreement is in danger, he becomes unpredictable. That's the most dangerous version of this. I know. She held his gaze without blinking. I'm not going to tell him the documentation has been compromised. I'm going to give him the chance to think he still has control of the situation. She paused. I just need 15 minutes with him. I need to confirm one thing. What thing? Whether my father knew. She said it quietly. Whether Gregory knew Webb was talking to Seo Yun's people. Because if he did, she stopped, picked up the thread again. If my father made a deal with the same people to protect himself by giving up Webb preemptively, then the entire picture changes, and we're not working with the information we think we have. Min-jae was still for a moment, looking at her with the expression she had seen only a few times, the expression of a man who was recalibrating in real time around someone who kept moving faster than his existing category for them allowed. Webb is in Chicago, he said. I know where he is. The earliest flight. I'm not flying commercial. You have the plane. He looked at her for one more long moment, then he picked up his phone. The flight to Chicago left at 6:15 in the evening. Tae drove them to the private airfield without being told what was happening, which was one of the things about Tae. He had the quality of a person who understood when the shape of a situation required movement and not questions. In the back of the car, Zarya sat with her phone in her lap, cycling through the contacts she had been compiling in her head since the study. Her father's personal attorney, whose number she had memorized from a document she had read once and never needed until now. 2 names Min-jae gave her from his own network. Eun-hee, who she called for 3 minutes before boarding and spoke to in the direct practical language that Eun-hee responded to, telling her what she needed watched while they were gone. Min-jae worked through the flight with the focused intensity of a man running a multi-front operation at altitude. Phone calls in Korean and English, his voice staying low and controlled, documents reviewed on the tablet, 2 encrypted messages sent to the contact adjacent to the federal attorney's office. He had pulled a second phone from the interior pocket of his jacket, an older model, the kind used for communication lines that existed separately from his primary operational network. 3 hours in, he set the tablet down and looked at her. Your father called twice while we were boarding, he said. I know. I'll call him when we land. She was sketching. She had the black notebook on her knee, moving through the nervous energy the way she always moved through it, letting her hand do something so the rest of her could think. He's going to want to know what we're doing. And what are we going to tell him? Enough. She looked up from the notebook. Not everything. Gregory has a 40-year habit of managing situations by preemptively offering up variables he thinks he can afford to lose. If he knows what leverage we have, he'll try to use it himself before we can deploy it properly. You don't trust your own father. I love my father. She said it simply, without anguish, just as a fact, established. I don't trust his judgment under pressure. Those aren't the same thing. Min-jae looked at her for a moment. No, he said. They're not. The plane descended into Chicago just before midnight, the city spreading out below the windows in its enormous grid of light. Lake Michigan, a black absence to the east. The downtown towers clustered and bright, the neighborhoods fanning outward in illuminated blocks toward the flat dark of the suburbs. Zarya looked at it from the window the way she had looked at it her whole life, as a place that had shaped her, that had required things of her, that had taken things from her in the specific, unasked way that cities took things from their children. She was back. She had not expected to be back. She pressed her forehead briefly against the cold glass and breathed. Marcus Webb lived in Lincoln Park in a narrow brownstone that he had owned for 22 years, 3 blocks from the park itself, the kind of Chicago property that quietly appreciated while its owner aged inside it. The lights were on when they arrived at 11:45. Min-jae's Chicago contact, a man named Daniel who communicated almost entirely through nods and minimal syllables, and who had the particular physical stillness of a person trained to be unnoticeable, had confirmed Webb was home, had confirmed no additional security presence, had confirmed the block's configuration in 12 words before moving back to the shadows of the car's back row. 15 minutes, Min-jae said. I know. If anything changes inside, it won't. Zarya. He caught her arm. Not hard, just a contact, his hand around her wrist in the light grip of a person holding something carefully. She looked down at his hand, then up at his face. If he's already decided to protect himself regardless of consequence, a familiar face won't matter. I know that too. Then why? Because I need to look at him. She said it quietly. I need to see his face when I tell him what I know, because how a person looks when they're caught. She stopped. I'll know. I'll know what we're dealing with from the look on his face, and that tells us how to move for the next 12 hours. He held her wrist for one more second. Then he let go. She got out of the car. Webb answered the door in a sweater and reading glasses, a glass of red wine in one hand, the expression of a man interrupted during the private hours he considered his own. When he saw Zarya, his face moved through several things in rapid succession: surprise, pleasure at the familiar, then something else, something underneath the pleasure that flickered and was immediately suppressed. She saw it. She had been looking for it. Zarya. He smiled. It was a good smile. He had always had a good smile. My God, what are you doing here? It's almost midnight. Can I come in, Marcus? Of course, of course. He stepped back, the automatic hospitality of a man in his own home, and she came through the door and into the narrow entry hall, and he closed the door behind her and turned with the glass of wine still in his hand. Your father mentioned you were in Vancouver. I didn't know you were... Sit down, Marcus. He stopped. The quality of her voice had changed between the doorstep and the hallway. Not dramatically. She hadn't raised it, hadn't hardened it into anything theatrical. But the softness was gone, and what was under it was something that the Marcus Webb who had known her as Gregory's quiet one had apparently not prepared himself to encounter. Sit down, she said again. He sat down on the narrow bench at the base of the staircase, still holding the wine. His reading glasses were perched on top of his head. She stood in front of him. You were approached by a foreign investment group 8 months ago, she said. You provided them with copies of the documentation you had already filed with the federal attorney's office, in exchange for a private arrangement that would give you controlling interest in the Freeman Group's 3 remaining legitimate subsidiaries after my parents were removed from the picture. The blood left his face. Not dramatically. It was a slow process, like a tide going out, the specific draining of color from a person whose prepared defenses had just been bypassed entirely. Zarya, I'm not here to threaten you. She said it evenly. I'm here because I want to understand one thing. Just one. She crouched down to his eye level. A deliberate choice, removing the standing over dynamic, putting herself in the position of someone who wanted a real answer rather than a surrender. Did my father know? About you? About what you were doing? Did he make his own deal with the same people to protect himself by giving you up? Webb stared at her. His face was doing the thing she had told Min Jae about. The thing that told her everything she needed to know. The micro-expressions moving through it like weather across a flat landscape. Too fast for most people to read, but she had spent 20 years training her eye to see what was under the surface of things. And what she saw in Marcus Webb's face was not the expression of a man whose partner had betrayed him. It was the expression of a man who had anticipated betrayal and was now surprised it had arrived from an unexpected direction. He doesn't know, she said. Not a question. Webb exhaled. One long, controlled exhale. No, he said. Gregory doesn't know. She stood back up. How long? How long what? How long have you been planning this? He looked at the wine glass in his hand, set it down on the step beside him. I built half of what your father has, he said. 30 years. Every structure, every protection, every clean line between the money and the source. I built it. His voice was quiet. Not angry. Something past anger. Something that had aged into a different shape. And for 30 years I've been the man nobody remembers was in the room. Marcus, your father sold your sister, he said. Then he sold you. Do you know what he almost sold the year before that? The Wicker Park properties. The ones your mother's parents left her. He was going to liquidate them without telling her. I stopped it. He looked up at her. I've been stopping the bleeding for 30 years. At some point, a man decides to stop stopping the bleeding and starts letting it run. The hallway was very quiet. You should have left, she said. You could have just left. I tried leaving once, in 2019. He called in a debt that I didn't know he was holding. A real debt, not financial. He looked at his hands. I stayed. Zarya stood in the hallway of this man's house, in the city she had grown up in the middle of the night, and felt the specific weight of a story she had not known existed, pressing down on the version of events she had brought with her, reshaping it, complicating it in the irreversible way that true things complicated the comfortable, incomplete versions of themselves. I can't help you, she said. I want you to understand that. I can't protect you from what's coming. But the deal you made with the foreign group, there's documentation of it. If it surfaces before the cooperation agreement is finalized, your deal with the federal office dissolves and you're on the wrong side of both lines simultaneously. She held his gaze. You have maybe 6 hours before that documentation is in the right hands. He looked at her for a long moment. What do you want? I want you to call the federal attorney's office tonight. Not in the morning, tonight. And I want you to tell them about the contact with the foreign group voluntarily as an amendment to your cooperation statement before they find out from another source. She paused. If you tell them first, you have a chance. If they find out from elsewhere, you have nothing. And my arrangement, that's gone either way. She said it without cruelty, just clearly. The Freeman Group assets aren't something I can give you, but your freedom is still a variable. 6 hours, Marcus. She turned toward the door. Zarya. His voice was ragged at its edges. Your father, he does love you, in the way he knows how. I need you to know that because I've watched it, and it's real even when everything else about him isn't. She stopped with her hand on the door. I know, she said. She went back to the car. Minjae was outside it, leaning against the passenger side with his jacket collar up against the cold, phone in hand. He looked up when she came down the steps. He read her face in the 2 seconds before she reached him with the precision she had come to expect from him. The ability to receive a great deal of information from a person's bearing before they opened their mouth. He didn't know, Minjae said. No. She stopped in front of him. The November air off the lake was sharp and specific, carrying the smell of the water from 3 miles east. Webb's going to call the federal office tonight. He has enough self-preservation instinct left. She looked at Minjae. Your contact, the attorney adjacent to the federal case. He needs to be ready to receive a call from Webb's attorney within the hour and guided in the right direction. Already on it. He held up the secondary phone. I made the call when you were inside. She looked at him. You were listening. I was listening. He said it without apology. Daniel has a contact mic that works through standard residential doors. I needed to know if the situation was changing faster than we could manage. She should have been angry about that. She cataloged the anger, felt its shape, and set it aside because there was no time, and because the operational logic was not wrong even if it violated something she would address later. What else? She said. The documentation of Webb's contact with Seo Yoon's people. I've had it transmitted to 3 separate secure locations. If the federal office receives Webb's amended statement and the documentation simultaneously, the cooperation agreement doesn't dissolve, it transforms. Webb becomes a witness against a foreign criminal enterprise rather than just against your father. He paused. Your parents' exposure doesn't disappear, but it becomes manageable, negotiable. In exchange for what? In exchange for your father's full cooperation on the foreign enterprise case, which is significantly larger and significantly more interesting to federal prosecutors than a 15-year-old financing structure. He held her gaze. Your father goes from being the primary target to being a secondary asset. It's not a clean outcome, but it's survivable. Zarya stood on the dark sidewalk in front of Marcus Webb's brownstone and breathed the lake air and looked at this man. This specific, impossible, exhausting, careful man. And felt something move inside her chest that she was not ready to examine in the middle of a Chicago street at midnight. You worked that out while I was in there, she said. I've been working it out for 3 days. I needed Webb's position confirmed before I moved. He looked at her. You confirmed it in 11 minutes. 15. I told you 15. 11. The corner of his mouth moved, not a smile, something more constrained. I was counting. She looked away. Down the street where the Lincoln Park elms made dark shapes against the amber streetlight, their November branches stripped and specific against the orange city sky. My father, she said, has to make the call himself. His attorney tonight to the federal office. He paused. I can't make it for him, but you can. She picked up her phone. Gregory answered on the first ring. I need you to listen very carefully, she said, and I need you to do exactly what I tell you. No questions, no negotiations. You do this exactly as I say, and there's a path through this. Do you understand me? Her father was quiet for 1 second. Yes, he said. She talked for 8 minutes. When she hung up, she stood for a moment with the phone at her side. Tay, behind her, had moved the car up half a block. Daniel was already gone. She hadn't seen him leave. The street was completely quiet. Min-jae was still leaning against the car, looking at her. "It's done," she said. "Not yet. The hard part is done." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Come here." She looked at him. "What?" "You're shaking." He said it matter-of-factly. "You've been shaking since you came out of that building, and you're doing a very good job of not showing it, but you're shaking." He straightened up from the car. "Come here." She wanted to tell him she was fine. She had the words ready, the same words she had deployed on 1,000 different occasions, in 1,000 different rooms when the ground had moved, and she had needed people to believe she was still standing normally on it. She didn't say them. She closed the 4 feet between them, and he put both arms around her, and she pressed her forehead against his shoulder and breathed, just breathed, 3 deep, controlled breaths, her hands fisted in the fabric of his jacket. He didn't say anything. He didn't rub her back or smooth her hair or perform comfort in any of the performative ways she had learned to dread. He just stayed absolutely still and present and warm against the cold Chicago night and let her take the 60 seconds she needed. She stepped back, straightened, looked at him. Something was happening in his face that she had never seen there before. Not the careful, composed surface, not the operational assessment. Something underneath all of that, something unguarded and specific and aimed entirely at her. And it was so unprotected looking that she had to look away from it because she was not ready, not here, not on a sidewalk in Lincoln Park at midnight when everything was still unresolved and fragile. "We should go back," she said. "Yes." His voice was different. She felt the difference without looking at him. They got into the car. Tay pulled away from the curb without being asked and turned north toward the airfield. The city moved past the windows and Zaria looked at it going by. Her city. The city that had made her and taken from her and shaped her into the specific kind of hard that only specific kinds of loss could produce. And she thought about what was still waiting. The federal office receiving 2 simultaneous communications in the next 6 hours. The documents traveling through Min-jae's secure channels to their destinations. Her father sitting in his study in the family apartment making a phone call that would cost him his empire and preserve the parts of his life that could not be rebuilt. And beyond all of that, the thing that Seo Yoon's principles still represented, the network that had set this in motion and that a single voided deal and a redirected federal case would not simply dissolve. They had been refused. They had been outmaneuvered if everything held through the night. But they were not finished, and Min-jae knew it, and she knew it, and the next days and weeks would require a vigilance that they had not yet fully designed. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. An unknown number. A message with no text. Just a photograph. She stared at the photograph for 3 seconds before her brain fully processed it. It was a photograph of her studio, her East Wing studio in the Vancouver estate, taken from inside the room, the canvas on the wall visible, her paint jars on the shelf, her portable speaker on the counter, taken within the last 4 hours, while they were in the air, while the house was empty except for Eun-hee and the security perimeter and whatever had just walked through it. She looked at Min-jae. He was already looking at his own phone. His face had gone completely still in the specific way she now recognized as his most dangerous register. Not anger, not panic, but the absolute cold clarity of a man shifting into a mode that had nothing to do with feelings and everything to do with response. "Eun-hee," she said. He was already dialing. 3 rings, 4. The line picked up. And the voice that answered was not Eun-hee's. The voice on Eun-hee's phone was male. Young. Flat in the specific way of someone performing calm they didn't fully possess. "Mr. Kang, we have your housekeeper. She's unharmed. We'd like to keep it that way." Min-jae's face did not move. Not one muscle. The compression in his jaw was the only visible sign that anything human was happening underneath the surface. "Put her on," he said, a shuffling sound. Then Eun-hee's voice, clipped, precise, with the controlled annoyance of a woman who considered being taken hostage a significant imposition on her schedule. "I'm fine. There are 3 of them. One is an idiot. The other 2 are nervous, which is worse." A pause slightly away from the phone. "I said I'm fine. Stop holding my arm like that." The line shuffled again. "You heard her," the male voice said. "We want the documentation. Everything you transmitted tonight. We want the file locations and the access codes within 2 hours, or the situation changes." "I'll need to speak with my people in Vancouver," Min-jae said. "Give me 30 minutes. 20, 30. His voice had the quality of a wall. "You called me for a reason. That reason requires me to be operational. Give me 30 minutes or this conversation was pointless. A pause. 30 minutes! The line went dead. Min-jae lowered the phone. Tae had already pulled the car to the side of the road without being told. He was looking straight ahead through the windshield, his shoulders rigid, waiting. How many security at the estate? Zarya said. 3 on the overnight perimeter. They were either bypassed or turned. Min-jae was already dialing a second number. I'm finding out which. If they were turned, then I have a different problem than I thought. He held the phone to his ear. 3 seconds. Someone answered. He spoke in Korean, rapid, low, the tonal shift of a man issuing precise instructions under pressure. 40 seconds of this. Then he hung up. 2 of the 3 overnight security are unaccounted for, he said. The third sent an emergency signal 14 minutes ago from the east perimeter. He got out. He got a message out. His location is the coastal path. He's wounded. He looked at her. The car's interior light was low, and the Chicago streetlight came through the windows at an angle that made his face look carved. There are 4 more of my people 40 minutes from the estate. Armed. They'll be on site in... He checked his phone. 22 minutes. And Yoon-hee is alone with 3 people for 22 minutes. Yes. Zarya looked at her own phone. The photograph of her studio was still on the screen. Her paint jars, her canvas, the portable speaker she had moved from the studio 3 weeks ago because the mornings were better with music. She closed it. The documentation, she said, if you give them the access codes, the files self-corrupt on unauthorized access. I built that into the transmission architecture. He met her eyes. There are no real access codes to give them, which means the 30 minutes I asked for is the window we have to resolve this before they realize I was stalling. 28 minutes now. Yes. Call them back in 26, she said. Keep them on the line. Give them partial information. Something that sounds real, something that requires them to attempt verification. That buys another 10 to 15 minutes of them looking at a screen instead of looking at Yoon-hee. She looked at him. You're 4 people. They know the estate's layout. Better than anyone. Entry points that bypass the main sight lines. The eastern service access, below the cliff line. It comes up through the utility corridor into the house's lower level. He was watching her. Zarya, how long has Yoon-hee worked for you? He was quiet for 1 beat. 19 years. Then we're getting her out. She looked at Tae in the front seat. How fast can this car get to the airfield? Tae's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. 16 minutes. Go. Dot. The flight back to Vancouver was 53 minutes. Min-jae spent 40 of them on the phone. 3 separate lines running in rotation, his voice moving between Korean and English in the fluid, pressurized way of a man managing a multi-point operation in real time. The coordination of his 4 people on approach to the estate. A call to a contact in the Vancouver City administration, brief, coded, producing a result she didn't fully understand, but that made Min-jae's shoulders drop 2 millimeters, which she had learned was the equivalent of visible relief in another person. She spent those 40 minutes doing the only thing available to her, sitting still, sketching nothing, letting her mind run the variables without trying to force them into resolution before she had information she didn't yet have. At the 32-minute mark, Min-jae called the estate number. The same flat young voice answered. Min-jae gave him a string of alphanumeric sequences. Plausible. Structured. Designed, she understood, to require manual input verification against a secondary system. Busy work, screen-staring work, the kind of task that occupied hands and eyes for exactly the window they needed. Verification will take 8 minutes, the flat voice said. That's standard, Min-jae said. The files are partitioned. He hung up, looked at her. 8 minutes, she said. My people are already inside. Ben. The car that met them at the Vancouver airfield took them up the cliff road in darkness, and when the estate came into view at the end of the driveway, all its lights were on. Every room, every exterior fixture, the full illumination of a house that had been turned inside out by people looking for something. 2 of Min-jae's people were outside the front entrance. A third was visible at the corner of the building, radio in hand. A Vancouver City vehicle was parked on the drive. 2 men in civilian clothes who nonetheless moved with the particular economy of people who carried weapons stood near it. Min-jae's contact in the city administration, she understood now. She was out of the car before it fully stopped. One of Min-jae's people, a compact woman named Ji-yeon, whom Zarya had seen twice before and who communicated primarily through precise, minimal action, met her at the entrance. "Housekeeper is in this kitchen," Ji-yeon said. "Unharmed. Angry." Zarya exhaled. "The 3 intruders?" "2 are detained. 1 ran the coastal path and went into the water." Ji-yeon's expression conveyed her opinion of this decision. "Coast Guard has been notified. The water is very cold tonight." The 2 turned security. "1 is cooperating. 1 is not yet cooperating." She said it with the flat precision of someone for whom not yet carried specific operational meaning. "Min-jae's wounded man on the coastal path. Ambulance is en route. Non-critical." Zarya moved through the entrance and down the corridor toward the kitchen. Yoon-hee was sitting at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a cup of tea and the expression of a woman who had revised her opinion of the evening from significant imposition to event requiring post-mortem analysis. There was a small cut above her left eyebrow, not deep, already cleaned and covered with a thin bandage, and her steel-gray hair had come partially loose from its usual arrangement, which was the most visibly disordered Zarya had ever seen her. She looked up when Zarya came in. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Yoon-hee said, "You're back." "We're back." Zarya sat down across from her, looked at the bandage. "They hurt you." One of them grabbed my arm coming through the east corridor. I hit him with the cast iron pan from the second shelf. She picked up her tea. "He'll have a bruise." "Yoon-hee." "I'm fine." She looked at Zarya over the rim of her cup. Her eyes were very steady. The particular steadiness of a person who had been frightened and had declined to remain frightened once the immediate cause was removed. "Are you?" "Yes." "Chicago." "Done. Or it will be by morning." Yoon-hee nodded once, set down her cup, looked at the kitchen, the slight disarrangement of it, a chair pushed at the wrong angle, one of the cabinet doors open that shouldn't be. She stood up, straightened the chair, closed the cabinet, sat back down. "He came back," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "Good." She picked up her tea again. "He should have come back. This is his house." A pause. "It's your house, too." Zarya looked at her hands on the table, the paint still embedded in the creases of her knuckles. Cadmium blue, a color she had been working with 3 days ago and never fully got out no matter how long she washed. The permanent evidence of the work she did, the life she carried in her hands. "Yoon-hee," she said, "why did you let Seo-yoon into the house that morning?" The kitchen was quiet. Somewhere outside, the sound of the city vehicle on the drive, voices exchanging information in the night. "Because she asked to come in," Yoon-hee said, "and because I thought you needed to hear what she had to say." She looked at Zarya directly. "I've worked for that man for 19 years. I know what he needs better than he does. What he needed was for you to know the full weight of what he was carrying so you could decide whether to carry it with him." She paused. "I made a judgment. It could have gone differently. Most things could." She finished her tea. It went the way it went. Besh. Min-jae found her in the studio at 3 in the morning. She had come here after Yoon-hee went to bed, after the estate had been walked through and documented and the city contacts had departed, and the 2 detained men had been taken to a location Min-jae did not specify, and that she did not ask about because there were still categories of his world that she was navigating the edges of without stepping inside them. She had come to the studio because it was hers, because they had been inside it with a camera, and she needed to stand in it and reclaim it with her own presence. She wasn't painting. She was standing in front of the large gray-blue canvas, the one she had been working on since Chicago, the one that had followed her across the country and waited in this room through everything, and looking at it. She heard Min-jae come in. He stood in the doorway, jacket gone, sleeves rolled to the elbow, looking tired in the deep structural way that wasn't fixed by sleep, but by time, and the eventual cessation of the thing causing the exhaustion. He looked at her, then at the canvas. "You figured it out," he said. She looked at the painting. He was right. She had figured it out. Not tonight, not consciously, but at some point in the last several weeks, it had stopped being ambiguous and become what it was. She could see it clearly now in the studio's low light. The dark corner that she had deepened over weeks was a weight, a carried weight, the kind that pressed down on the left side of a figure she could now see had been emerging from the layers all along. A person. Standing. Not upright exactly, not perfectly balanced, but standing. The blue-gray all around them, not emptiness, but weather. The kind of weather that had always been present and had never stopped being present, and that the figure had simply learned to stand inside. Yes, she said. He came further into the room, stopped beside her, looking at the canvas from the same angle. Your parents, he said. By morning, the federal attorney's office will have 3 simultaneous inputs: Webb's amended statement, my documentation of his foreign contact, and your father's direct cooperation offer. The prosecutors will spend the next week sorting it out. Your father's attorney will negotiate the cooperation terms. He paused. It won't be clean, but it will hold. I know. Your mother's name comes off the primary documents if your father's cooperation is accepted. That was the condition I transmitted through the attorney contact. He said it without emphasis, like it was a logistical update. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the painting. You negotiated my mother's exposure separately, she said, without telling me. Yes. When? On the plane, while you were sitting across the aisle. He paused. I knew you were thinking about it. I could see it on your face. You were running the variables and you hadn't gotten to that one yet, and I had already gotten to it, and I could close it faster than explaining it to you would take. He finally looked at her. I'm not apologizing for the efficiency, but I wanted you to know I did it. She looked at him for a long moment. Thank you. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She held his gaze. Thank you. The studio was very quiet. Outside, the Pacific continued its ancient and different business against the cliff base far below. That sound that had been the constant underscore of the last 6 weeks, the sound she had grown so accustomed to that silence would have been stranger than its presence. The people Seo-Yun represents, she said, this isn't over with them. No. They'll try again. Yes. Through a different door, with a different approach, in a time frame I can't predict. He said it plainly. The way he said true things, without cushioning, without the softening impulse that was actually a form of disrespect. That's the reality of operating where I operate. The doors keep coming. Then we keep closing them. He looked at her. Something shifted in his face. The same unguarded thing she had seen on the sidewalk in Chicago, the thing she had turned away from because she hadn't been ready. She was still not entirely ready, but she had stopped pretending readiness was a prerequisite for truth. Zarya, he said. I know, she said. You don't know what I was going to say. You were going to say something about the contract, about the 18 months, about how the terms of the arrangement were set before either of us understood what the arrangement was actually going to become. She looked at him. And then you were going to ask me something you've been not asking for about 3 weeks. He was quiet. Ask it, she said. The studio held the particular stillness of a room that had been a working space. The faint smell of paint and linseed oil, the accumulated presence of hours of private concentrated effort, the kind of room that told the truth about its occupant by simply displaying what they did when no one was watching. I don't want 18 months, he said. I want to learn what this is, without a contract defining its edges, without a clock on it. He paused. The care he took with words was not hesitation. She understood that now. It was precision, the same precision he brought to everything. I want to learn how to be in a house with you without managing what you're allowed to know about your own life. I want to eat breakfast and run the cliff path and argue about whatever that painting is going to be called and do the actual work of... He stopped. I'm not good at this. I know. I haven't been good at this for a very long time. I know that too. She looked at him. I'm not easy either. I want you to understand that. I'm not easy and I'm not uncomplicated and I have... She stopped. Let herself say the next part properly. I have things I haven't told you, things from before that affect how I move in the world and that you're going to encounter whether I plan for it or not. She held his gaze. I'll tell you when I'm ready, not before, and I need you to accept that. Yes, he said, without hesitation. And when I tell you, I need you to stay still. I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to stay in the room. Yes. She looked at him, the word twice without equivocation. She had said I need twice, and he had said yes twice, and it was such a small exchange and the weight of it was enormous. Okay, she said. He reached out and touched her face. One hand, his thumb at the edge of her jaw. Not a declaration, just contact, present and careful and warm in the specific way of someone who had learned to be careful through years of being the opposite and had not forgotten the cost of carelessness. She let him. She stood still and let his hand be on her face and felt the full, uncomplicated fact of it. The warmth, the steadiness, the specific realness of a person choosing to be this close to another person in a room at 3 in the morning after everything that the last 18 hours had been. She put her hand over his. They stood like that for a long moment in front of the painting. 3 weeks later, the Freeman Group's legal restructuring was announced publicly. Gregory Freeman retired from the board. His attorney released a statement citing health considerations. The 3 legitimate subsidiaries were placed under independent management pending review. The federal investigation was reclassified as a cooperative inquiry, which was the language that meant the primary target had become a cooperative asset, which was the language that meant Gregory Freeman would not spend his remaining years in a federal facility. Marcus Webb's separate arrangement was disclosed. His cooperation agreement was restructured under terms that gave him nothing he had planned for and something he hadn't. A reduced charge on 1 count of unauthorized financial disclosure in exchange for complete testimony against the foreign enterprise network that Seo Yoon's principals operated. He accepted it. He sent Zarya a letter 3 days after the announcement. 4 lines. No apology. Just 4 lines about the 30 years he had spent in her father's shadow and a single closing sentence. I hope the quiet one found somewhere loud enough to matter. She read it twice, folded it, put it in the back of her sketchbook, where she kept other things that were true and difficult and worth keeping. Seo Yoon's principles were not dismantled by the testimony. Organizations like theirs didn't dismantle easily. They redistributed, reconstituted, opened new doors as old ones closed. But the immediate network that had pressured Min Jae through Seo Yoon was disrupted significantly enough that the pressure came off for a defined period. And in the world Min Jae operated in, defined periods of reduced pressure were the closest thing to peace that existed. Seo Yoon herself disappeared from Vancouver and sent Min Jae one message, 3 words in Korean that he translated for Zarya without being asked. Watch the doors. Zarya printed those 3 words in small letters in the bottom corner of the large gray-blue painting when she finally finished it. Not as a title, just as a notation. The kind an artist made when a piece contained something that arrived from outside the original intention and needed to be acknowledged. She called the painting Standing Weather. The merger celebration happened on a Thursday evening in early December, in a downtown Vancouver venue with crystal chandeliers and a guest list that contained the usual mixture of legitimate power and its criminal shadow dressed in the same expensive fabric. Zarya wore dark green again. Not the same dress, a different one, chosen by herself, paid for with the money she had started making from a commission that had come through 3 weeks prior. A corporate client who had seen photographs of her work circulating through Min Jae's social network and wanted 3 large format pieces for a new Seoul office building. The commission was larger than anything she had been paid before. She had spent 2 days being quietly stunned by it before she called her gallerist in Chicago and said she needed to talk about representation. She stood at the edge of the main room while Min Jae spoke with a group of men near the bar. Business, the low-register, sustained conversation of people conducting serious transactions at social events, and she watched the room with the observational attention that had been her primary survival tool her entire life, now repurposed into something that felt less like survival and more like genuine curiosity. A man approached her, mid-60s, well-fed, the comfortable confidence of old money and older networks. He had been pointed out to her earlier as a senior partner in a development firm with interests across 3 Pacific Rim markets. He looked at her with the assessing quality of a man who had spent decades evaluating acquisitions. "Mrs. Kang," he said, "a pleasure. I've been wanting to speak with you." "Have you? I understand you were... Well, the circumstances of your marriage were somewhat unconventional." He smiled, the smile of a man who considered himself diplomatic. "Min Jae has always been an unconventional operator. I imagine you've had quite the adjustment." "It's been interesting," she said. "I'm sure. He's a remarkable man, Min Jae, quite patient, all things considered." He paused, letting the implication of patient hang in the air with deliberate placement. "To take on an arrangement like this." The room moved around them. Crystal glasses, low music, the murmur of several hundred conversations. Zarya looked at the man. She had spent 25 years being the invisible one, the quiet one, Gregory's forgotten daughter, the woman who fixed things nobody asked her to fix and stood in corners of rooms cataloging what she saw and keeping it all inside the locked room of herself because that was the price of safety. Invisibility, smallness, The constant managed disappearance. She was done with the price. My husband is patient with people who deserve patience, she said. He's not patient as a character trait. He's patient as a strategy. There's a difference. She held the man's gaze. The arrangement you're referring to was unconventional for approximately the first 20 minutes. After that, it was simply a marriage. The fact that you're still calling it an arrangement 8 months later tells me more about how you see women than it tells me anything about my husband. The man blinked. Also, she said, if you're considering approaching Min-jae about the Pacific Rim development interests you're carrying, the 3-property cluster in Busan that your firm has been trying to offload for 14 months, I'd suggest leading with the infrastructure liability disclosure rather than waiting for due diligence to surface it. He doesn't like surprises in the financials, and he has better intelligence than you probably think. She picked up her glass. Enjoy the evening, she said. She walked away. Min-jae found her 6 minutes later at the far end of the room near the window overlooking the winter city. He came and stood beside her. He had clearly been briefed. Tae had been nearby, had almost certainly seen the exchange, but his expression was not concerned. It was something else. The Busan properties, he said. Ji-yeon mentioned them last week. I was reading through the background documentation you left on the kitchen table. She looked at him sideways. You do that. Leave documents on the kitchen table. You know I read everything. She looked back at the window. I filed it. He was quiet for a moment, then, the man is going to spend the next 3 days trying to figure out how you know. Good, she said. Let him. Min-jae was quiet for another moment. Then, low, close enough that it was only for her. You know what you just did. I told a man something true. You positioned yourself in a room full of people who have been waiting to find out what you are. You just told them. He paused. That changes things. I know. There's no going back from that kind of visible. She turned to look at him directly. His face in the low light of the chandeliers had the quality it had in the kitchen at 3 a.m, unguarded, present, aimed at her with the specific undivided attention of a man who had stopped managing the distance between them. I don't want to go back, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he took her hand, intertwined his fingers with hers in the simple, unremarkable way of people who had been doing this long enough that it required no decision. Just the automatic movement of 2 people who had found, through improbable and expensive and exhausting means, the particular shape of another person that their hand fit against. They stood at the window and looked at the city. The rain had started. Vancouver's winter rain, fine and persistent, blurring the lights of the street below into long amber smears against the dark. The kind of rain that didn't announce itself, that simply arrived and continued, patient and indifferent, neither hostile nor gentle, just present. The way weather was. The way the things that mattered most were not dramatic, not announcing themselves, but standing there in the room with you, breathing alongside you, asking nothing except that you stop pretending they weren't real. Later, much later, in the back seat of the armored black Mercedes heading back through the rain-soaked city, Zarya leaned her head against Min-jae's shoulder. Not because she was tired, though she was. Not because the evening had been long, though it had, but because it was where her head went when the performance pressure was off, when the room had been left behind and there was nothing left to manage or navigate or hold together through sheer internal will. It simply went there. Min-jae didn't move, didn't shift, just let her lean. Outside the windows, the city moved past in its winter configuration. The Christmas lights beginning to appear on storefronts, the rain-slicked streets reflecting everything back in doubled amber and white, pedestrians moving under umbrellas through the particular purposeful rush of people who had places to be and were getting to them. A city full of lives happening in parallel, each one containing its own weight of things survived and things ongoing and things not yet resolved. Zarya watched it go past. She thought about this painting in the studio. Standing weather, the figure she had not planned but had been working toward for months, standing in the gray-blue weight of accumulated weather with the carried thing pressing down on its left side and its feet still on the ground. She thought about the commission in Seoul, about her gallerist's voice on the phone, the way it had pitched upward in the second sentence when she understood the scale of what was happening, about the East Wing studio in the morning, the light that came through the north windows at a specific angle between 7 and 9, the particular quality of that light that she had not found in any other room she had ever worked in. She thought about her parents, her father in his apartment in Chicago, navigating the long aftermath of decisions made decades ago and now arriving. Her mother, who had known everything and said nothing, and who Zarya had spoken to twice in the past 3 weeks. Real conversations, the kind that hadn't existed between them in years, cautious and imperfect and worth having. The thread between them pulled thin by everything that had happened and not yet snapped. Still there. She thought about Simone, somewhere in the world with her bag and her passport, and the person she hadn't named, living the life she had chosen by refusing the one their father had tried to hand her. Zarya didn't know where she was. She had sent one message to Simone's old email address the week after the federal announcement. Not asking for anything, not explaining anything, just 3 sentences telling her that their parents were going to be okay and that the door was open when she wanted to come back through it. She hadn't heard back yet. She would wait. Minjae's hand found hers in the dark of the back seat. He didn't look at her. He was looking out his own window at the same passing city, but his hand found hers with the same automatic certainty as before, the movement of a person whose body had updated its habits without consulting the part of them that managed appearances. Zarya closed her fingers around his. The rain came harder for a moment against the car's roof, a brief intensification, and then eased back to its regular rhythm. She thought about what Yoon-hee had said in the kitchen that first morning, the second drawer, and how that had been the beginning of something neither of them had named but both of them had known was a beginning. She thought about the cabinet hinge, the bathroom tile, the cliff path at dawn, the way a house absorbed the presence of the people inside it, the way it held the shape of what happened in its rooms, the way a person held the shape of what happened in their years. Not perfectly, not without damage, but genuinely, in the grain of the walls and the particular quality of the light, and the sounds that collected in the corners of the spaces where people had been honest with each other. She thought about Min-jae asking her, at the beginning, whether she was angry, whether she was all right. The smallness of those questions and the size of the thing underneath them. A man who had built the entire architecture of his life around controlled distance, around the management of what other people could access, slowly and expensively learning that distance was not the same as safety, and that control was not the same as strength. Learning it the way people learned the things that mattered most. Not from being told, but from encountering someone who required something different and finding, to their own surprise, that they wanted to provide it. She turned her head slightly, without lifting it from his shoulder, so that she could see his profile against the rain-blurred window. He was already looking at her. "Are you okay?" he asked. The same question, the one nobody in her life had ever asked the way he asked it. Not as social formula, not as performance of concern, but as an actual wanting to know, an actual willingness to receive whatever the true answer was, whether it was easy or not, whether it required something of him or not. She had been 25 years old when she stopped expecting to be asked that question and meaning it. She looked at him, at the face that was not conventionally handsome but was intensely, specifically his, the strong jaw, the dark eyes that missed nothing, the particular weariness of a man who carried large things and had recently, carefully, decided to put some of them down. The city lights moved across his face. The rain came down. "Yes," she said, and she meant it completely.